Interview with Josh Frydenberg, the Energy Minister, this morning. I spoke to him about the climate change review and began by suggesting that one of the most significant things in the review is the government's now in principle support for international permits.
Well, our thinking is to find the lowest cost abatement. When it comes to helping the environment, it doesn't matter whether you've reduced a tonne of CO2 here in Australia or in another country. We are determined to ensure that jobs growth continues, that the industry in Australia remains strong and its international competitiveness continues. And to do that, we are committed as a government to find the lowest cost of abatement. We've taken an all-of-the-above strategy, Kieran. As you know, we're working hard at home to reduce our carbon footprint in the electricity sector. We've seen emissions drop 1.8% in the last quarter as more renewables come into the system, some $9 billion worth of renewable investment. When it comes to energy productivity and energy efficiency, we've been introducing new standards for lights and for appliances, which have helped reduce household saving bills by up to $200 a year, as well as reduce our emissions profile. And then on the
international credits, it's been quite a change of heart from the government. Tony Abbott, for example, in 2011 was very critical of the idea of international credits. He said that money that shouldn't be going offshore into dodgy carbon farms in Equatorial Guinea and Kazakhstan. That's the way that he described the prospect of the purchase of international credits at the time.
Well, 2 points to make. Firstly, there is a wide cross-section of business and industry groups that support the use of international permits, whether it's the Business Council of Australia or the Australian Industry Group, or whether it's the Grattan Institute, or whether it's the Climate Change Authority. All have talked about the importance of international units in helping to reduce Australia's carbon footprint. As well as that, through the Paris negotiations, some 60 countries, including like-minded countries, Japan and South Korea, New Zealand, have all talked about wanting to be part of the international permit system and will obviously be participating in the design rules, and we will make a final decision about the use of those permits by 2020 when those rules are in place.
But Mr Abbott's expressed his criticism in the past of international credits. Environmental advocates at the other end of the debate also expressed their concern about the difficulty in verifying those particular international credits. Can you reassure them and the Australian people that you would be doing that, not just offloading our responsibility on that front?
Well, far from it. What we want to ensure is a credible international system, and when we've now given our in-principle support to the use of these permits, with a final decision to be taken by 2020 when we've considered the timing, the quantity of those permits that we may allow, as well as obviously ensuring quality standards. This is an international agreement, Paris, and it's seen a record number of countries contributed to it, and a large number of countries want to see these permits be allowed, but also see them be used to help meet domestic abatement tasks. So we've taken an all-of-the-above approach, work in the land sector, work in the energy efficiency sector, worked in the electricity sector. Our first...
What about the transport sector? Are you going to look at vehicle emissions, tougher vehicle emission standards?
Yeah, we've got that process underway, Paul Fletcher and I, and obviously consulting closely with the industry. But whether it's transport, land, electricity, the built environment, we're committed to reducing Australia's carbon footprint, but doing so in a way that doesn't compromise jobs, doesn't compromise Australia's economic competitiveness, and doesn't compromise domestic economic growth. And we think permits can play a role in that, and that was one of the outcomes of the review, where there was some very good support for it.
And do you think of vehicle emissions, tougher vehicle emission standards, are part of that as well? Is that your view?
Well, we want to see Australia keep up to date with the latest technology abroad, and other countries have a more stringent approach to Australia in this regard. But we want to proceed carefully and in consultation with the industry, but that's what we're doing. But the good news today, Kieran, is not only are we putting out the climate review, which says we're on the right track, but we're also putting out new emissions data, which shows that emissions have come down in the last quarter, and that significantly the tasks that we have to meet and beat our 2020 target has improved by 30% over the last year, and to beat our 2030 target has improved by 60% over the last 2 years.
Well, you've obviously got the National Energy Guarantee. You've got to bed that down. With the Prime Minister's reshuffle to be announced today, are you happy staying where you are, recognising that you've got a fair bit of work to do?
We certainly do, and I've been very pleased and privileged to take on this important portfolio and have worked very closely with the Prime Minister. So I'm not expecting to change, but these decisions are really within the remit of the Prime Minister, and it's not for me to speculate on the details of a reshuffle.
And finally, well, we do know that George Brandis is going to the UK to replace your former boss, Mr Downer. Do you wish him well on that front?
Well, George has been a wonderful friend and colleague, an outstanding Attorney General. He can look back with pride on what he's achieved this year and in years prior, leading the government in the Senate, but also seeing the safe passage through of the marriage equality legislation, as well as dealing with some very tricky but important national security legislation, and most recently around foreign interference. So George has been and is an outstanding colleague and friend, and I wish him all the very best for his future endeavours.